Oftentimes people think of Prosci or ADKAR when they think about organizational change management. Oftentimes people think these are interchangeable terms, but what we often find is that Prosci and ADKAR is not nearly enough to drive change. And I want to talk here today about what's really important to change management efforts. My name is Eric Kimberling. I'm the CEO of Third Stage Consulting. We're an independent consulting firm that helps clients through their digital transformation journeys. And just as a caveat and as a disclaimer, I am not Prosci certified. I've hired a lot of people, worked with a lot of different clients that are in fact Prosci certified. I've worked with the ADKAR and Prosci tool set and methodology. So I know enough about it to know that it provides a good high-level starting point for change, but it's not nearly enough to drive effective change. And what I mean by that is that oftentimes organizational change practitioners and even organizations going through change think that Prosci is going to give them the fundamental starting point they need to drive change. And it certainly can't hurt to have the Prosci certification and understand the ADKAR model, but it creates a false sense of confidence that somehow a week-long training course is going to replicate years and decades of actual transformation experience, years of making mistakes in those transformation experiences, and really understanding things outside of organizational change management that are hugely critical in making those changes stick. Now, the other challenge with Prosci and ADKAR is that we're focusing on the actions and the behavior we want to see from the change program before we've even necessarily defined what our end business results are. So we're focusing on the actions, not the end result of what we're trying to get to. So effective change begins with understanding what is that end state and what is it we're trying to get at first, and what's that tangible business value we're trying to get out of whatever change we're going through. It's not about feeling good or communicating general feelings. It's about figuring out what are the activities that are going to help us drive measurable business value. So what do? Do we just abandon our change efforts? Do we abandon Prosci certification? Not at all. What we want to do is augment what we already know about change management and Prosci in general, and talk about what we can add to that certification to make ourselves more successful in our change journeys. The first thing to recognize is that it's premature early on to define whether or not an ADKAR model or some other methodology is or isn't appropriate for your change initiative if we haven't done a change assessment yet. Every client we work with looks different. They have a different culture, they have different goals and objectives. The transformation they're about to go through looks much different, and they have different pitfalls and organizational landmines that they have to deal with and that we have to deal with in helping them through that. And so we need to assess the landscape, understand what are those pitfalls, what's the potential resistance for change, what are the sources of the resistance for change, how are we going to overcome that change. All that stuff needs to be defined first, and we can't define any of that stuff until we've done that organizational assessment. So typically what we do is we'll do a two-prong approach. We'll do a quantitative organizational survey combined with qualitative focus groups to get a better understanding of what is the culture, what are those likely sources of resistance going to be, and what are the likely enablers of change, and ultimately give us the answers or give us the inputs to define the answers for what is the best organizational change strategy given our culture and our unique landscape and our unique transformation strategy. We've got to define what's best for us, and the only way to do that and to define which tool set we have is to first conduct that organizational assessment. So once we've assessed the organization, we understand where we are today, where the pitfalls are, what our change strategy at a high level might be. We then need to figure out how are we going to get internal alignment? How are we going to make sure that our executives are aligned on what this change is, what the transformation goals and objectives are, and importantly, what are those business drivers and the measurable results we're trying to get at. And that's probably the key of what's missing from many change management initiatives is that measurable, tangible business value. Change management too often becomes a very academic, fluffy, feel-good exercise that isn't grounded or rooted in any sort of business results. And we need business results at the end of the day. Otherwise, why are we investing in these change efforts? So we need to first get the executive view of what the business results are they're trying to accomplish, and also what are the parameters for the transformation. Are we trying to create a culture that looks different than the way we are today? Are we trying to drive more of a standardized operating model? Are we trying to increase flexibility through the organization and agility? Are we trying to bend our culture in a certain direction? we need to have clarity from the executives on what it is they're trying to accomplish, compare that to the organizational assessment we've done to then define what is that strategy and plan that's going to allow us to best enable some of those expected changes. The next thing we need to do to augment Prosci and ADKAR methodologies is to define what our future state business processes and operating model are going to be. What is it that we're going to change from a workflow perspective, from a business operations? If we're improving our supply chain, what's that going to look like? If we're standardizing and consolidating into a shared service model, what does that look like? What are the roles and responsibilities? A lot of questions that need to be answered before we can start talking about how we're going to enable the change and how we're going to affect the change. Now, I've recently written an article that's called the Trojan horse approach to organizational change management. And this is an important concept because what we found in our consulting practice is that change efforts are most effective when we don't have a standalone separate change team or change group. Change should be embedded throughout the organization and throughout the change effort. So people that are, for example, defining business process improvements should ideally be equipped and enabled to enable those changes and fuel and adapt those changes to the organization, rather than passing the business process changes over the wall to the change management team, who will then figure out how we're going to enable people to accept that change. And this is also true for our own consulting practice. The most effective change consultants we have are the ones that aren't actually change management consultants. They are broader business consultants that happen to have a strong change methodology and tool set, but they can also do other things too. They can re-engineer business processes, they can program manage, they can manage other aspects of the technical and people and process components of the transformation. So really embedding organizational change management into the overall effort is very important, and that all starts with defining your business processes and workflows and what you want that future state operating model to be. And within that operating model future state, we also want to identify what the change impacts are. How are people changed? Not at the corporate big picture level necessarily, but at the individual work group, department, and ultimately individual employee level. How are people affected? Once we understand the difference between where people are today, where they are tomorrow, we can then figure out what the right tool set and methodology is to help get them there. Now, an often overlooked aspect of Prosci-driven organizational change programs is the whole concept of organizational design. And this involves really rolling up our sleeves and analyzing roles and responsibilities, job descriptions, and how the organization is designed in general, because usually that's going to change as part of your transformation, but not enough organizations think about that. They are usually thinking about how technology will change the business. They might be thinking about how business processes are going to change, but they very rarely are thinking about how the organization should be designed to support that change. And without having that input into our change program, we're not going to be successful, whether it's Prosci certified or not. So we need to have that as a prerequisite, is understanding how our organization is going to be designed, what are the impacts of the people, what are the risks, what sort of resistance will we see, how are we going to transition people into different jobs, and in some cases maybe even out of the company. Those are very sensitive issues that involve people and very sensitive topics. So we want to make sure that we have a clear vision for how the organization is going to be designed so that we can create a tailored change strategy, plan, methodology, and tool set to enable those changes. So I discussed earlier about how we often take a Trojan horse approach to change management. And that's an important part of closing statement here and how to make your change efforts more successful. We want to make sure ultimately that our change efforts are fully embedded with and integrated with our overall program and our overall transformation. Now that may sound like a no-brainer. You may think that every company naturally does that or every project team naturally does that. But again, it's back to the point of we want to make sure our change management team isn't over in a silo doing their own thing, following their own methodologies and processes without fully understanding and being part of what is that overall transformation. So for example, we used the example earlier in the video about business process changes and how ultimately or ideally you'd want to have the change team involved in those process definition exercises. And ideally, it'd be the same people that are defining process changes and improvements as would be enabling the change. So that's just one example of how we can integrate our workflows and integrate change management into our overall program. it's not just a matter of making sure that change management meets the same milestones and deadlines of the overall program, but it's also a matter of how we manage the project and manage those work streams and integrate them and bring them together into more of a cohesive approach. So I in no way want to suggest that Prosci and ADKAR certification is not relevant or not important, because a lot of people find value in it. People that we've worked with on the client side and our own consultants that have been through the program speak very highly of it in general. It's very popular. In fact, it's one of the few, if not the most popular, organizational change certification program out there. So they're doing a very good service for the organizational change management profession. But the downside is we want to make sure we don't view that like a silver bullet. It's not a silver bullet. It's not the one thing that's going to make you successful. And if you've never done change before and you've just got Prosci certified, the certification does not make you anywhere close to being ready to manage a transformation. A good analogy to this would be if you're about to go get heart surgery. Do you want the guy that just went through a quick certification program to do the heart surgery on you, or do you want the guy or gal that's been a surgeon for a long time, been through a lot of different types of scenarios, and been battle tested? That's the type of change expectation we should have for ourselves and for our change initiatives, is we should have people there that have been through this many, many times. Maybe they have the certifications, maybe they don't, but at the very least, we know that they've been through these types of transformations, they have the battle wounds, they can drive business results, they can get their hands dirty in the process improvements, they can integrate with the rest of the program. That's the type of stuff we need to round out the picture to be more effective with change. So I hope you found this information useful. I also encourage you to download our guide to a successful change initiative. I've included that link in the fields below. I also encourage your feedback. If you have been Prosci certified and you have feedback on the program or how it's helped you enable some of the changes you've been through, or if you're not Prosci certified, has that been a liability, or what has been good alternative training or certifications? Love to hear any feedback you have on this whole topic. And I also encourage you to please subscribe to my channel, and hope you have a great day.